these and figured out how to modify the design from here to here to here to here. And it gets tougher as you go from here along the way. So the idea is choose the glass and then you'll design the wood around the glass. Okay. And the smaller this bottom opening, the harder it is to make. Okay. So this demonstration is going to concentrate on using a piece of glass that's about 3.5 inch diameter. And I have the part number for this glass if you want. Okay, now let me get rid of this. So the idea is you find a piece of glass and design the wood around it. And the wood is pretty straightforward as far as the top. The top needs to be loose, okay, because the wood will expand and contract with humidity, the seasonal variations in humidity inside your home, and it will break the glass if you're not careful. So you want a loose fit on everything. So the lid, just a simple lid with a loose fit. I won't talk much more about that. The dispenser mechanism is pretty straightforward. It's a bowl, a shallow bowl, with a rim that has a slot or a groove for a decorative inlay. And instead of putting turquoise or abalone shell or gold nuggets or whatever, we'll put a piece of glass. Okay. And then we'll drill some holes in there so we can screw what I call the dispenser mechanism, this next ring. And this is cut so that it forms a dispenser mechanism. So there's what I call the horseshoe, it's stationary and is glued to the base. And the slider carries the candy from this hole to the edge of the base and lets it fall out. And if you can make these two parts, you can make a candy dispenser. That's all there is to it.
Did you cut your horseshoe on the scroll side?
Pardon me?
That horseshoe, you cut it on the scroll side?
Yes, sir. But when I first started doing this, instead of a scroll saw, I used a coping saw. Can I give you this? And Robert, Dad, if y'all will pass these around. This is the business end of the whole thing. If you can figure out how to make that, then you've got it made. Okay? Now, there's a lot of different ways of going about making it. This I made with all vertical drills. All holes were drilled vertically, and all the scroll saw cuts were done vertically. When I go to this size, I have to start drilling the holes at an angle, and I have to make some of the back cuts at an angle. I had to cut this at an angle, and I had to drill this at an angle. So this one's quite a bit harder, and this one is harder still. But the same concepts apply. So I want to concentrate on making this one because it's the easiest, and at the end of the demonstration, if we have time, I'll talk about the details on how to make these angle cuts and angle drills. Okay? These. Oh, by the way, this one, I took a piece of sheet metal and cut a washer, and I did that on the wood lathe. Put magnets in here. Now you can spin it if you need to, but it's still held on well enough. And then I started using bigger magnets. So something I probably may not get too much time.
So how did you fix that little sheet metal washer? Just epoxy on it?
Yeah, I use super glue,
Oh, simple.
but I may change from super glue. I don't like super glue for long-term projects. It becomes brittle and cracks. So I may change to something like contact cement, something that'll last a long time, because the candy dispenser that gave me the idea, that thing is 50 years old, still being used. So these can last a long time. I want durable adhesive when I do this.
is there any benefit to like the original that you didn't make that is that entraps the glass versus the one yours where they're loose?
Okay. The simplest way I know how to make these is to glue the glass into that ring, which is what I'm going to do for this
Okay.
one. But there's so many different variations. Like this one, you know the old gumball machine with the rod up the middle? This is that idea, and the glass is loose. The critical aspect of attaching the glass to the wood is the wood will move with seasonal variations in humidity. More importantly, the wood will move from going from my shop to your house. My shop is not climate controlled, and when I left the other night, it was 95 degrees and single digit humidity. But when I take it into the house, they swell. So you'll notice that my lids are super loose because they're made with bone dry wood, and when they go into someone's house, they swell. So the critical aspect is having a loose fit. And that's true for no matter which design we look at. So I'm going to concentrate on gluing the glass to the wood with a flexible silicone adhesive because that's the simplest. But there are other techniques that are available if you want to use them. Another thing I want you to understand is that those of you know me, I kind of anal, more than kind of sometimes. You know, all the details have to be worked out just right. That's not true on this. This dispenser just has a smooth bottom and it works at a particular level. This dispenser has a flat bottom but has a rotating piece of glass. It works almost as well as this. This one has a slope and the glass can rotate. It works a little bit better, but none of them are so much better than the others that there's any real difference. So if you design something your way, chances are it's going to work okay. If none of these are perfect, but they all work okay. And that's something I want you to understand. You drive yourself nuts trying to make it perfect, and I haven't figured out how to do that yet. All three of these designs work well. Let's see. Now, I've built this as a beginner's level difficulty. And I want some feedback at the end about whether or not you think that's true. Because all we have to do is turn a shallow bowl and cut a decorative ring, and then we have to drill some holes in the appropriate spots. Then we have to turn a disc and flatten it, and then the rest of it's scroll saw work. So I kind of like feedback at the end about.
Do you always use acrylic for that bottom?
No, sir. This is just for the demonstrations.
Oh,
Because this
oh,
is,
that's actually a wood. Okay.
yeah, this
don't-
represents this entire piece of wood.
Gotcha.
I just needed a way to see
Gotcha.
inside there.
Gotcha.
So, if I want to make this, the first thing I do is make a sketch. So I'll take the piece of glass and I'll draw it up here. And then I'll draw the outline of the wood. So I'll figure out what I want the wood to look like. Then I take this section and decide what it needs to look like. So I'll measure the inside diameter of the glass and subtract a 1/16 of an inch, or maybe more, depending on how the humidity is. And that marks that inside groove. I'll measure the outside diameter of the glass and add a 1/16, and that tells me the dimension. And I mark that, and then that's all the turning I really have to do. Okay, so but the important thing is the bottom of the glass determines the size of this slot. Then I move over 1/8 of an inch, and I want the edge of this 1-inch diameter hole to be 1/8 of an inch inside that slot. So the glass determines the size, the position of that hole. Okay. And that's the hole from the top. I just drill straight through, put the hole in the dispenser mechanism. And that determines how I treat or how I design this slider. So the glass determines the slot size determines the hole position, and that hole position and the profile determine how to make this. So it's important to use a design with crude dimensions on it. And I say crude dimensions because in order for this thing to work, candy has to fall in the hole, and the slider has to transfer that candy to the edge of the base. Okay. Here. Now, this one, it turns out I got really close, but on some of them, I may be off an eighth of an inch too far this way. Well, the candy will still fall out. If I'm an eighth of an inch back this way, candy cannot sit on that ledge. It'll fall out. An M&M is about a quarter inch thick. And it turns out I can be off a quarter of an inch because of the curvature here and the size of an M&M. It will fall off. So I can be off by up to a quarter of an inch before I run into problems. So if you don't like making accurate measurements, you don't have to. Okay? There's a lot of sloppiness.
Where's the quarter go?
I haven't designed that one. Although there are designs like that out there. So I guess the thing that I want you to understand is if you make a drawing of the profile and then use the profile to set this point and this point, this diameter and this diameter, draw the ring, figure out where the hole goes, that's going to tell you how to design the slider. Designing the slider is the hardest part of the whole project. I made it through that without breaking any glass.
So far.
So do you design the entire and cut the entire base on the lathe and then slice it on the bandsaw to cut your
Like this.
coin slot? Or not coin slot, but your candy slot?
Yes. So
Okay. That makes more sense. All right.
let me get this on. I'll show you what's going on. So the idea is to get your design, and it turns out I need about a 4.5 inch diameter piece of wood. So I'll start with 4 3/4, 5 inch. True it up, and then I'll face this guy off. And the idea is to cut 3/4 inch slabs off of this. I don't know if you can see it. So, the platform, or the top piece of wood, is here. And that's a 3/4 inch thick piece of wood. But what I would normally do is true up my blank and face it off here. And I'd come over 3/4 inch and put a mark. And then come over a 1/4 of an inch and put another mark, and that represents the curve for my cutoff tool. And I'll just slice off this 3/4 inch piece and lay it down. And I'll face off this new surface and flatten it. Come over 3/4 of an inch and put a mark, and then come over a 1/4 inch and put another mark. And that's the curve for here. Then I'll flatten that new face and sand it flat. Okay. When I mean sand it flat, I'll face this off so it's just slightly concave, just a little bit of an inward curve to it. That way, when I hold the sandpaper up against here, I'm resting on the outside edges, and it doesn't every time I've seen this done, most people use a wide piece of wood with the sandpaper glued to it. They hold it up against here, and that will flatten this where it's just crazy flat. Flat enough so that this joint, when I put these two pieces back together, can disappear. This is a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. It's about 1.5 inches wide. It's pretty flat. And this 80 grit sandpaper is so worn out that it's useless, but it does hold another piece of 80 grit sandpaper. And I'll just hold this up against here with it spinning. Rest the back end on the tool rest. Put pressure with the heel of my hand in there. And it'll flatten that, and I'll rub it up and down so that when I lower it, I can see the middle, and you can watch as it sands. And when it starts sanding close to the middle, I quit. That way, if I sand past, I can start tipping this sideways and not knowing. So I'll go from concave to flat, and if I keep going, I'll make it convex. So I'll watch this center, and as soon as I start sanding that center, I quit. Because nowhere along the way in this process do I need that center, inch even. I don't need it flat. I need the outer edges where this gets glued together. Now the next thing is I grab my glass, I measure the inside and outside diameter, and I find the largest outside diameter and add a 1/16 of an inch. And I'll put a mark. And then I measure the inside diameter and find the smallest inside diameter. Subtract the 1/16 of an inch, and that's where this other mark is. Then So now I'll mark the slot. Then I come over 1/8 of an inch, mark the edge of this hole, and then come over 1/2 inch and mark that center punch it. Then I typically take this stuff to the drill press and drill all my holes. And the idea is to drill these holes so that this 1.5 inch screw goes 1/4 inch deep into the base. So I'll take a 7/64 drill bit, drill all the way down to here. And then I'll body drill this section, and then I'll countersink deep enough until I get 1/4 inch here. So I turn this true and I face it off, then I mark it. And I drill it. So I'll have the marks have the 3/4 inch plus the 1/4 to the curve, and the 3/4 plus the 1/4. I drill deep enough so that this is 1/4 inch deep into the base. Okay. Then I body drill the platform, drill so that this screw will just slide straight through without threading. And then I countersink to get the depth that I want. Okay. Then I cut everything off. So I mark it, I drill it, and I drill it on the lathe sometimes. I use a drill press quite often, but I could use this where this is a 7/64 drill bit, which is appropriate for drilling this. I drill a hole through here, and that lets me get started straight. And once I've drilled in about 3/4 of an inch, I get rid of the block of wood, my guide, and I continue drilling just by hand. And that way, when I cut these off, I can flip them around, reattach them to this flat surface with carpet tape, face them off again, and flatten both sides, and they're really dead flat. Then I rearrange everything and put it back together and screw it, and it runs true. Got a little bit of a wobble, but it's been put on and taken off several times. So this lets it run true, and the grain is aligned about as good as I'm going to get it. That makes sense to everybody? Okay. But I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. The trick to getting this to work is to make a guide so that you drill straight in at the beginning. Okay. One more thing before I forget. A lot of times I'll take this to the drill press and drill these holes with a Forstner bit that gives me the cleanest, best hole. But my next option is to use a hand drill and a hole saw, and it leaves an ugly hole. But who cares? It's going to be hidden by candy. You're not going to see it. And if it bothers you, you can always sand that and make it smooth and look good. And this is a perfectly acceptable way to do it. The fact is, when I drill the angled holes, I don't use a Forstner bit or on a sign plate or sign table. I eyeball it and use one of these. So, low-tech, simple solution.
Have you tried using dowels instead of the screws to make that bond between the 3 layers?
I want to take this top layer off to clean it. There's no way to access this back, and the little bitty chips that you get in the bottom of the bag,
Eventually you dunk it up.
if they work their way back there, you can't get it out. Okay. Or if they're just, for some reason, you'd really like to clean that thing, you can unscrew the top and open the whole mechanism up. I wish I could glue them. It would simplify a lot of things, but I also insist on being able to clean it and maintain it. So we mark it, we drill it, you cut it off, flip it around and use carpet tape and flatten it again. And now we screw these 2 discs back on there. And you'll notice that there's a 3/4 disc and then a 3/4 disc. I could continue this idea. I could buy a 1x6 and cut it up, flatten each side on a drum sander and just stack those discs. Like I do that with plywood quite often. Take scrap plywood and use that to make prototypes. If you don't think you have the skills to make one of these, make one out of plywood or 1x6. That way, if you mess this one up, you throw it away and cut another piece and start over. Do that till you get it right. And then you get this one right, and then you can make the whole thing. That's a good way to start. So now I'm trying to decide what I forgot, but I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to start turning this thing. Close to where protection. Okay. First thing I need to do is cut this slot, and I'm just going to use a parting tool. It's a homemade parting tool that's a 1/16 of an inch wide. Running about 1200 RPM. In the handout, I said to cut this 1/8 of an inch deep. I cut it 1/4 of an inch deep now because when I put glue inside here, the silicone adhesive, and then lay the glass in there, I do not want the glue oozing up over the top. I don't want the glue touching the candy. to set this at the 1/4 inch.
Close enough.
A little more. Now, here's the important part. I've chosen my glass, I made my measurements, and set the dimensions of this. I marked the top because the top is not always the same size as the bottom. See how that's tight? That's not acceptable. I don't, oh. When I marked it, my pencil slid and I slid everything toward the inside. So the inside is way small, the outside is too big, too tight. So I don't care what it looks like. I'm taking that outside another 1/16 of an inch. I cannot let that glass be tight. So this slot is super big on the inside. And that's what I want. That 1/16 of an inch that I add, I did that based on just guesstimates about how much seasonal variation or humidity do we have, how much does wood change with that change in humidity. But it also depends on what are the conditions in my shop versus what are the conditions in the home that this is going to. So I add a 1/16 and then I always cut on the outside of the line to make it bigger because I want this sloppy. The next thing I need to do is cut a shallow bowl. I want that about a 1/2 inch deep. And the purpose of the bowl is to just funnel the candy toward that hole. And what happens is it funnels the candy toward the center, and the hole is not in the center. So there's always a pocket of candy on the backside. Just shake it. About a 1/2 inch. Got metal parts falling all over the place today. Cut a little lip so I don't get a catch and slide out. And I'm just going to try to make a solid hole. There's the bottom of the hole. Okay. That's good enough. that little bump there, I should spend the time to get this smooth, and then now is the time to sand this. Okay. When you're sanding it, you see how I cut through here because I missed my mark. When I made the mark, my pencil must have slid over, and I didn't pay attention to that. So I cut it at the side of here. That really doesn't matter. Because when I sand this, I want to take this lip and just curl it over so I don't have a flat spot. If you have a flat spot, the candy, as it works its way down, will hit that flat spot and stick. And that will help form a cavity inside where the candy won't fall through. So I try to sand that off. Okay. But now is the time to sand this face. But other than that, we're done. Any questions about that part?
Do you finish the interior for the candy here?
Yeah, I've gone through a wipe-on, Watco's wipe-on polyurethane. And I've done that because there's so many surfaces in here that are curved and you have the holes from the drilling that I get runs all over the place. So I just put a real thin layer of wipe-on finish. Now I'm ready to turn the outside. And my design is just turn a bead and then some kind of decorative part and then a base. And I have this undercut so that when I pull the slider out, the candy falls in the middle of my hand. On the square one that I showed you, the candy would fall between the wood and my finger. And I used to have the dexterity to flip that over, and I don't anymore. It drives me nuts. So I undercut this so the candy falls in the middle of my hand. Before we started, I set the outside diameter to just a little over 4.5. And I want to cut this back to 4 1/4 at this point. I'm going to set my calipers at 4 1/4. That'll tell me when I have that dimension right. On the front side, I want to leave about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of this bead to the edge of that slot, just a flat spot there. Now, this line represents the very bottom. I don't wear a face shield very often. Now would be a good time to wear a face shield. That's one of you guys wants to walk with. I can go long periods of time without any disaster. And then I was making the lids for 2 of these, and I got hit right in the face twice. Okay, now at this stage, I just need to get the overall profile close. So when I take this apart, use what I've done here with that profile to determine the size and shape of the slider mechanism. So I don't have to finish all of this, but I tend to do it anyway, just in case I get lucky and the slider mechanism comes out perfect and I don't have to return it. 99% of the time I return it. I'm going to go ahead and finish this out. I got rid of the big ugly. So now would be the time to stop and fill all this stuff and do what I need to do. You notice all my designs are the same. I'm not a very skilled spindle turner, but that's been on my list for years to get better at. There is a book in our library that talks about spindle turning. I want to check that out again one of these days that I remember. Take it home for a month and start designing different things because all mine are about the same size within an inch. They're all the same concept, but there's no reason I can't stretch this out.
The design book that Bill Hamilton would be good for that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one in the library and then there's a book that Ben showed. But there's no reason I can't stretch this out and have a big base, real pretty decorative stem, and then a candy dispenser on top of that. I just don't have the creativity right now. But if I do my homework, I will.
It's real easy to do that on correct dimension graph paper. Same thing with segment work. You can that really help speed up those drawings.
Yeah, I do it on the computer with a piece of graph paper next to it because I use the paper, which is what I'm accustomed to show me what to do on the computer, which I can change quickly. Okay, I'll make these cuts. We'll do the next thing. Pretty good. I wouldn't bother sanding this at this time because I still have to take this apart and get that slider made. Okay. Let me stop. Make sure I know what I'm doing. Oh, that's ugly. That's better. I don't know how I can do this. I can turn this big vessel and have a spot that I completely miss and not see it until I'm ready to go to the next stage. That's great. Quick review of what I've done. I just want a bead so that this point where the platform meets the slider is the largest diameter. And then I want to curl the bottom of the dispenser mechanism under so that it's a smaller diameter, so that that slider has to move less distance. And the smaller the glass gets, the more I curl that over so that the slider moves less and less. That's an important design criteria. But other than that, I'm just cutting a bead. The other thing I have to remember is that there's 2 screws running into the base. And they're on a 2 5/8 inch diameter circle. So I have to make sure that until I get a 1/4 inch deep here, I don't go past 2 and say 2 3/4 of an inch. But other than that, the shape is free. And then once I get past a 1/4 inch here, I can do anything I want. Okay. Any questions about what I've done so far?
Pretty straightforward.
Simple enough, even I can do it. I forgot to tell you about this. So you can make this out of a log, and you cut the first 2 segments into 3/4 inch disc, process them, and get it screwed back on, and you're off and running. You can also make this out of plywood, or use segmented turning techniques by just stacking rings. And the idea is you have to get these top 2 right for the dispenser mechanism to work. And other than that, you're free to do what you want to do. There's another design that's out on the internet, and I've seen a lot of these, and I made one. And Van Baker gave me this from the show. And it's basically a mason jar where you pin the lid on, fill this with candy, and slide it in here. You have a hole in the platform. Underneath the platform is a slider with a hole in it. So I made one of these, and it turns out because you have a hole around a symmetrical flat spot, the candy will form a dome, and it sticks, so the candy doesn't come out. And you would think you shake it a little bit,
Blocks it in.
and it won't break that dome sometimes, because as the candy moves down, it forms a symmetrical dome that is incredibly stable. You have to shake the devil out of this thing to break it. Because I learned a lot of this by using one of these to teach myself what's going on. And that's why in all my designs, the hole is moved over to the edge. And it breaks some of that symmetry. The other,
If you put a bevel on that,
it makes it worse.
the ring, that makes it worse.
Makes it worse. If you have a symmetrical funnel, then that funnel lets the dome be smaller. And it packs everything in. And that dome becomes, it actually made it worse on the test that I did. So by moving the hole over to the edge, I break some of that symmetry. The dome still forms, but it's not as tough. It's not as strong. If you think about the Roman arch, as long as they were symmetrical and didn't bulge out, they're still standing a lot of times. But if you let one side be bigger or smaller than the other, it won't be that stable. And that's what moving that hole over does. The other thing that I learned, and I made half a dozen of these, testing different ideas. By having a straight vertical hole with sharp edges, the candy that falls down through here, part of the candy is completely inside the slider. Part of the candy is completely above the slider, and some of the candy is on that cut line, or I call it the cut line. I don't know what else to call it. Some of the candy is on that cut line. And when you pull this slider mechanism, it either has to go straight up or straight down. and that requires a lot of force. So on these designs that I have, I cut a ramp. And that allows the candy to expand when you first pull it, and then instead of going straight up, it slides up that ramp as you pull it. And that's why those mechanisms are so smooth. The ramp was not my idea. It was on the original prototype that I studied. And I very seldom see that on the internet, but that ramp is critical. So and I've studied different ramp shapes and all of that. They don't make a huge amount of difference, but to tell you now, I look inside and I come down about a third of the way, about a third of the thickness, and put a mark. And then from the center of the hole, I move over 1 inch, and that's where I start the ramp. And that ramp is 1 inch long and about a third depth. It works just fine. Okay. If you don't think you can make one of these, make one of these and then modify it until it works the way you want it. And then once you do that, you know exactly how to make this. And that's what I've done. I use this to make one of these out of plywood, and then I fooled with the plywood until I got it to where I wanted it. And then I started using pretty wood. Robert, would you pass this back? Oh, the other thing is, there's no reason you can't take a mason jar and use it on this mechanism. Would you pass this back to Dan for me, please? Dan, thank you. Okay.
Forged drill? My,
Ancient.
they don't make those anymore.
I forgot to charge the battery, so I added a cord. Okay, so the next step is to figure out what we're going to do with this. Michael, I'm going to try to do all my work with my hand here. If you will focus in tight. Yep. Yell at me if I don't. Okay. Put my hand here. Okay, the next thing I need to do is to take this disc with a hole in it and convert it to a dispenser mechanism. Okay. And I made the classic mistake of taking something simple, trying to apply it to all the different sizes that I have in there, and then describing how I do that. And that's what I put in the write-up, and it's really complicated. So I'm going to show you the easiest way I know to do this. I'm going to take the disc and I'm going to look at it from the bottom. I'm going to draw a center line and then come out 1 inch, put a mark, and then come back 1/8 and put a mark, and do the same thing on the other side. Do that over here and draw 5 lines, a center line and 2 lines over here. And this describes how wide the slider mechanism is going to be. Now, from this edge, I want to come over enough so that I have good strength here. So this is oak, so I come over 1/2 inch, and that's plenty strong. This will get glued to the base eventually, so it's going to have pretty good strength. But here I chose to just move over 1/2 inch. Okay. And now, if I measure from here to here, that's 1.5 inches, I believe. So it's a little more than 1.5 inches. All I have to do is get within 1/8 of an inch. So I'll call that 1.5 inches. I'm going to move over 1.5 inches and put a mark here. I want good strength in this tab on the back side of the slider. So I'm going to move over 1/4 inch That gives me this mark. And I do the same thing over here. And it turns out, don't get carried away making these marks exactly. These marks don't have to exactly line up with these marks. All you really need is this length to be the same as this length, because you're going to cut that wood out, and that determines how far the slider goes. Okay. Now, the last thing we need to worry about is I need some meat. I need some wood on this side of that hole. This dashed hole represents the hole in the middle, or the hole in the platform, the top. When I slide this mechanism out, I want to make sure that hole is covered so candy doesn't fall back here. Okay. So I need a little bit of meat here. In order to ensure that, I'm going to measure 1.5 inches this way and put a mark. And then I'm going to come at least 1/4 inch out, put a mark. So I have this mark, and this mark, and this mark, and I just hand draw that dash curve. And that's what I cut. And nobody ever sees that curve. You're the only one that sees it. Now, I tend to make this curve just a smooth arc, but that shortens this distance. If you made it straight across, you would make this distance as far as possible, and that would give you a longer slide if you needed it. So the shape of this curve depends on where these 3 points end up. If you do get stuck drawing a line across here, that makes this the break point. If the horseshoe, this outer piece is going to break, instead of breaking here, it'll quite often break over here if you draw that line straight. Breaking the horseshoe is not a problem. I do it all the time. You notice this piece of wood has a crack that runs here. When I cut this out, it will break, and I don't care, because I'm going to screw the top to it, and that gives me the angle that it puts it back to the correct angle. And when I glue that on, I gather strength from the base. So if I break this, I don't get excited about it. I just keep going. Quick review. I draw my 5 lines that tell me how wide this is going to be. I move over a distance, about 1/2 inch, whatever. And if I have to move over more because I have soft wood, then I'll move over more. Then I come over 1.5 inches, or whatever distance this happens to be. And then I come over 1/4 inch, or I can come over 1/2 inch if I think I need the extra wood there for strength. At this point, then I come back 1.5 inches here, and then give myself another 1/4 inch. So I cover this top hole. Connect these 3 points with some kind of arc, and I'm done. Is that clear to everybody? Do you think you can look at the models that I passed around? Do you think you can look at those and figure that out? Okay. That's the easy way, and that's the way I would suggest you do it if you're going to make the big ones. As these shrink, it turns out this point gets closer and closer and closer to the edge. This point moves closer to the edge until the point where you can't do this anymore. When the glass opening, the inside diameter reaches about 2 3/4 inch, you can just barely make this work. If it gets smaller than that, this technique won't work. That's why in the write-up, I have this long-winded way of doing it, where I start on the top, and I find this point first, and I work my way back. And that's to accommodate the smaller. But if you understand this, don't worry about what I wrote. Okay? Does anyone have any questions? while we're talking about this design, this is a prototype I made for the smaller glass, like the one sitting over here, the taller one. Yes, that glass came off the light bulb for a ceiling fan, I think. And that's inside diameter of about 1.5 inches, which means I can't use the simple technique. And basically, what I have to do is do all my marking on the top, because I have to cut this back at an angle. I have to drill the hole at an angle, and then I cut the ramp just like I normally do. I didn't cut this when I marked it for you though. Now, I don't calculate what the angle is. What I do is I cut a piece of cardboard or a piece of wood 3/4 of an inch tall, and in this one I wanted to move the hole over 3/8 of an inch. So I moved over, marked 3/8 of an inch, and cut the cardboard off, and then I held that up here as a guide. And I drilled a hole until I hit the mark that I put over here that I wanted. So I took an 1/8 inch drill bit, something small, and drilled with that guide, and then I missed the hole, just missed my mark a little bit. So I took a 3/16 drill bit and said I need to force it that way though. And I did that until I hit that hole about where I wanted. And then I drilled it with a drill bit about that size. And now I have a pilot hole that goes about where I want it. And then I can run this in about 2/3 of the way this way, and then the third of the way this way, and pull that off. And the hole is ugly, but I sanded it by hand, and candy will slide through it just fine. Okay. So these are the tricks that you have to pull to get to the smaller ones. Okay. When you get to that real small one, the last one I showed, you have to use these tricks and you have to measure accurately to within about a 1/16 of an inch. But other than that, it's the same concept. Any questions about?
Jim, do you put any kind of finish on those on the inside of the mechanism?
Yeah.
Does that affect the slide?
Yeah. You want this as smooth as you can get it, so I sand them pretty good, and then I use a wipe-on polyurethane. You can imagine what it's like finishing these, because all the curved surfaces and the holes, I use a dilute wipe-on polyurethane and put many coats on it, and then I stick it outside in the oven. And it makes it 105 degrees for a couple of days, and it's ready to go. And that's been working out pretty good for me, the wipe-on poly, because it doesn't run so bad. Okay.
Well, these high temperatures, can you set them out in the sun?
I literally, I finish them in the shop,
Put them in a black box out in the sun?
and I go put them on the porch of the shop that's covered, and I literally just set them outside and let them bake. Okay. Now, do I need to actually mark this one, or do you think you understand how to go about doing it? Does anyone have questions about how to go about marking one of these so you can cut it out? Okay. So after I've marked it, I take it to the scroll saw and cut it out. And then I sit down with chisel and sandpaper, and I get this so it slides, and I want it loose. Okay. This isn't the typical kind of work that I do where everything's tight, just right. Make it loose, because there's little pieces of candy that get in there, and those shells are hard, and you need room for this to work itself out. Okay. You need room for it to expand and contract, and parts of it will expand and contract at different rates than the other. So you want it loose. Okay. So I test this part this way. I test this part this way. And as long as everything moves smoothly, I'm ready to go. Okay. Now, normally I would have cut this one and it would fit right here, but I cheated and I made another one, and I'm going to replace this piece with this one.
We'll go to the bad side.
It's a part of the fun of doing this demonstration. It takes me all day to make one of these. From the sanding, I think the fastest I've made one of these, start to finish without sanding, is 2.5 hours. With the sanding and the finish work, it takes me all day to make one of these.
How do you keep the slide from, well, not that, but sliding out once it's actually on the lathe?
That's a good question. So the next thing I need to do, get this guy on here, is finish turn this. And what you ask is absolutely critical, and it's the only thing in red in that handout. If I turn the lathe on, this is going to slide out. Yeah, right? Trust me, I know these things.
Been there, done that.
It hurts. The other thing it does is after it's whacked your finger, it'll whack the tool rest and break a big chunk out of here. And you have to glue it all back on. So one technique would be to slide a 1 inch dowel in here. That assumes everything lines up just right. And it will not work on those where you have a curved hole. So what I've started doing is cutting keys that slide in here. And then I'll screw that on. This is inconvenient because I have to unscrew it to take these out. The dowel is more convenient. This is safer, because I can't pull that dowel out, go get a cup of coffee, go to the bathroom, answer the phone, and then forget to put it back in. I have to work to get these out. And for me, that's safer. Now,
You can't go around the outside of it because that's where you're going to work on.
yeah, I'm going to have to cut that.
Yeah.
I need to, did I get that on the right direction?
Got a little wobble to it.
I think I put it on the wrong way. When I'm paying attention, I put marks on the outside, 1 mark over here, 2 marks over here, and that way I get this back on at the right orientation. I forgot to do that.
You can make a note
Now,
of that for your demo.
we'll try this, see if it works there. Screwing this on and screwing it off may seem like a nuisance, but in the long run, it really helps. Because if I remembered to put those marks on there and paid attention, I would be guaranteed to have this thing back in the right orientation. And it's possible better? Okay. It's possible that all I'd have to do is sand it. Typically, I end up turning it. I've also learned that when I'm tightening these screws, because both of these are threaded, I have to press this way to get everything to line up this way. Because if I don't, I'll leave a gap here. And the purpose of flattening all of these surfaces is so I don't have a gap. And if I get everything right, you don't see that this is 3 pieces of wood. It all looks like one.
Jim, you got about 20 minutes.
20? Okay. I'm about to cut this, and all I really have to do is blend this piece of wood in with these other two, and I can call that finished. But if I decide that when I stand back, I go get a cup of coffee and I come back and look, that's not right. I want to take a little bit more off of here, open this thing up, and look at the tab here, and that tells you how much wood you can remove. And compare that with how much wood over here, and whichever is smaller, that tells me how much wood I can remove. So it may be that I can take a 1/4 inch off of here. A 1/4 inch off of here is a 1/2 inch off the radius, or 1/2 inch off the diameter. That's a lot. So if this is tiny, and sometimes I've had it where it's a 1/16 of an inch, I can't do anything except sand it. But if that's a 1/2 inch, then I can take up to, 3/8 of an inch off the radius, which is 3/4 of an inch off the diameter. I can make a huge cut. So if I study this before I glue it on, that tells me what my options are here. So it's a rather forgiving approach in that you know what you're about to get into before you get there. But you have to study this before you start turning. Here, I just want to just clean everything up. I'm supposed to grab this on. By putting a live center in here, I'll leave a divot. It's not a problem if you put candy in there, if you can't see it. I don't worry about it. I could get fancy and put some kind of, I could use a better technique that doesn't leave a mark. But when it's used, it has candy in it, and you'll never see it, and it doesn't bother me anymore.
When you buy M&M's, is there a way to buy them in bulk, or do you have to just buy them?
I'm gonna quit buying them for the next couple of weeks. I'm gonna quit buying M&M's for the next couple of weeks. You're happy with them things I've eaten. I'm really good when I'm testing. I do not eat the M&M's. I just test. And I do a whole bunch of tests at one time. And okay, this is what I want. These are the things I've learned and understand. I write it down. And then I eat them in 2 days. Then I buy some more and I eat them in 2 days. Okay. That's good enough. Okay. So that's the end of the turning. So normally, how much time do I got? 15 minutes, call it? Okay. Normally I would part this off now. Then I would take the slider out. I'd take the slider out and I would sand it so that it's a little bit thinner. and I want it loose so that particles that get in there can work themselves out. Okay. Then I would mark it to put a knob on. Okay. And that would be finished. And now I'm ready to do the finish work. Okay. And I've used wipe-on polyurethane. I've been using Watco's wipe-on because it has a lot of solids in it. I've also used polyacrylic, the water-based polyacrylic from Minwax for woods that I don't want that golden to. And that works pretty good. And I dilute that 50% with water when I put it on. There are so many curved surfaces and holes and places for runs to start that if I put any kind of thick finish on here, I'll regret it. It just drives me nuts. So I put many thin coats on. And as hot as it is, I literally let these sit in my shop while I go get a cup of coffee and have a sandwich. Then I take them out of the shop and put them outside and let them bake at 105 degrees. And then I put another coat on and do the same process. Okay? And that way I limit how much I have to deal with the runs when we're finished. Okay? I think I'm done. The lid, by the way, is contained in here. So I started with a blank about 7 inches long, and that allowed me all the curves that I needed and to cut these 2 pieces, and it left this piece for the lid. Okay. Do you have any questions about this simple version?
Now you want to see the complicated version?
We'll call you.
We'll call you.
I should be careful about that because there are a lot of steps in here. Okay. Drilling these holes. I want those 2 holes inside the cavity or inside this ring so the candy covers them. You never see it, but they have to be outside the slider. That's the only criteria there. I want this hole an 1/8 inch inside this slot. That's the only thing there. When the glass is bigger than 2 3/4 of an inch inside diameter, I can use the technique that I told you about. Where choose that distance. This distance is that length. And then to guarantee that I have wood back here, I'm starting this side, move out 1.5 inches, and then add an inch or add a 1/4 inch. And that guarantees that I have wood back here. As long as I have strength here and here, I'm good to go. I can break the horseshoe, and it's not a problem. I just glue it back together and then glue it to the base, and I get strength here. Okay. Do not turn the lathe on with this slider in place unless you either have a dowel or the keys. It will hurt. And you'll tear this thing up, by the way, too. If you don't think you have the skills to make this out of a log, use plywood or 1x6 and just keep making versions of these until you get it right. And then you make a version of this until you get it right. Then you know everything you need to know to make this thing. You don't have to follow my technique. If you want to cut these up off a 1x6, take it to a drill press and drill all these at once, which is what I do a lot of times. That works just as well. Although drilling them while they're on the lathe, if you use a guide to make sure you drill straight, that works great. I forgot to reproduce the lines on the outside that told me the orientation, so I could have made a bad mistake. But even that's not catastrophic. The worst that will happen if I put this on flipped around the other way is that the 2 holes won't line up, but the candy still goes through, right? So it's not that big a deal. It's very forgiving.
All right.
Read about food. Some of us are here for the food.
Like you say what? To be there.
Let's see. There's a whole lot of different options, and I want to be careful about getting too carried away with that. But this one I made out of plywood, just so I could test different options. Okay, it's the old gumball concept with the post that goes through, and that allows me to hold the glass, and this is not glued in. It also allows me, if it does form a cavity, I can rotate the glass, and often that's enough to break the cavity, as opposed to jiggling the handle, sliding it back in. Okay, it's just another option if you prefer. Okay. With these smaller ones, I couldn't put the screws inside the slot. So I put the screws in the slot. And then I took rare earth magnets. Those are 2 millimeter rare earth magnets. And then I took a piece of sheet metal and turned the washer out of it. It burns your hands, by the way, when the chips fall on you. Now this sits in there like that. And this is barely strong enough, so I went to 6 millimeter, and that's what's on the dispenser right there. And that holds really tight. But you can still rotate it. And if it does form a cavity, instead of shaking it, you just rotate. That breaks the cavity, and it will dispense candy. Okay. This one, again, has the angled surfaces. This angle, I eyeball. This angle and this angle should be about the same, and that keeps a uniform wall thickness here. But it doesn't have to be uniform. Sometimes I get nervous, and I'll crank this angle way back to make sure I don't cut through under here. But again, none of it's critical. I think I'm done.
Good
job.
I need a reality check. Is this a beginner's? Is this a beginner project?
Feels a little intermediate.
I don't think so.
Okay, because I said in the SWAT handout that it's appropriate for beginners because you have the problem with it. There's a lot of steps. None of them are critical, but there's a lot of steps. But you turn a bowl, you turn a ring, you turn a disc, and then you cut it up. So each step is amenable to the beginner.
The turning job is a beginner. The turning portion feels beginner, but the rest of it, all the other parts feel a little more intermediate. I could see myself needing to do it on plywood first. I would mess up. Forget the step.
You know, I use plywood and 2x4s and 2x6s.
Yeah, 2x4s. Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. All right, before lunch,